There is a certain kind of person whose mind never truly becomes quiet. The moment they open their eyes, their mind is already running. Yesterday, tomorrow, possibilities, questions. The day is not even started, and yet something inside them is already moving. A simple text message becomes a mystery. A normal conversation becomes an investigation. Even silence begins to feel like information waiting to be decoded. Most people assume this is just intelligence, or caution, or being detail-oriented. But overthinking is something more complicated than that. It is not just thinking a lot. It is thinking in circles that never seem to end. The same thoughts, the same worries, the same what-ifs, again and again. And after a while, the mind no longer feels like a tool. It feels like a place you are trapped inside. That is the strange thing about overthinking. At first, it can feel useful. It feels responsible, careful, protective, as if the mind is doing its best to keep you safe from mistakes, pain, uncertainty, or regret. But over time, that same process can quietly become exhausting, because the search for certainty never really ends. And maybe that is where the story begins. Some people overthink because they naturally notice more detail, more possibility, more subtlety. Their attention does not stop at the obvious surface of things. It keeps moving, it looks underneath, it searches for patterns. For others, overthinking becomes something learned, not in a classroom, not through advice, but through experience. At some point, their mind learned that the world can be unpredictable, that people can change without warning, that safety can disappear, that uncertainty can hurt. And so the brain developed a strategy: analyze everything, predict everything, prepare for everything. Because if you can see every possibility in advance, maybe nothing can catch you off guard. At least, that is what the mind begins to believe. And sometimes this pattern starts very early, in childhood, in unstable environments, in homes where moods changed quickly, in situations where reading people carefully felt necessary. The child learns that small signals matter, tone matters, silence matters, a look on someone's face matters, and over time, this kind of attention becomes automatic. The brain does not simply react anymore. It monitors, it scans, it predicts, even long after the original danger is gone. And that is why overthinking can feel so difficult to switch off. Because to the brain, it does not feel like a bad habit. It feels like protection. Imagine a conversation that lasts only 2 minutes. Nothing dramatic happens. A few words are exchanged. A small pause appears. Then the conversation ends. For most people, the moment disappears. But for an overthinking mind, the conversation has only just begun. Hours later, it is replayed again and again. Why did they pause like that? Why did their tone sound different? Did I say something wrong? Was something hidden behind those words? What most people experience once, the overthinking mind experiences many times. Not because it wants to suffer, but because it keeps searching for the meaning that may have been missed. And the strange part is that the more the mind searches, the more possibilities it creates. One explanation becomes two become five become a whole chain of imagined conclusions. That is one of the most exhausting parts of overthinking. The event itself may be small, but the story built around it becomes enormous. A short message can ruin an entire afternoon. A delayed reply can create 10 different theories. A change in someone's expression can quietly grow into a fear about the future. This is how overthinking expands, not through reality itself, but through interpretation. And interpretation has no natural limit. Another pattern appears in the way overthinkers live in the future. Many people think about tomorrow, but overthinkers often live in hundreds of tomorrows at once. What if this goes wrong? What if they misunderstand? What if I fail? What if I regret this later? A single decision can open a maze of possibilities. Even a simple choice can feel strangely heavy. What should I say? What should I choose? What if the other option was better? What if I make the wrong move? The mind treats every decision like it carries hidden consequences, and in that state, certainty begins to feel priceless. But certainty is also incredibly rare. That is the trap. The mind wants complete reassurance in a world that almost never offers it, and because it cannot find enough certainty, it keeps thinking, and thinking, and thinking. One of the biggest illusions inside overthinking is the belief that one more thought might finally solve everything. One more replay, one more analysis, one more angle, one more late-night mental investigation. As if the answer is almost there, as if the next thought will be the one that brings peace. But most of the time, it does not happen that way. Because overthinking is not really moving toward a conclusion, it is moving in loops. And loops can feel like progress when you are inside them. That is why overthinking often feels productive, even when it is not helping. The brain mistakes mental activity for control. As long as it is still thinking, it feels like something is being done, like the situation is being managed, like a hidden answer is being chased. But there comes a point where the mind is no longer solving a problem. It is simply feeding the cycle that keeps the problem alive. And then there is the emotional cost. People often talk about overthinking as if it is purely mental, but it is not. The body feels it too. The tension, the restlessness, the tiredness that appears even after doing nothing at all. Because even when the body is still, the mind may be running at full speed. At night, in the shower, in silence, during a walk, while lying in bed. The outside world may be quiet, but internally, dozens of unfinished thoughts are still competing for attention. That kind of exhaustion is difficult to explain. It does not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it just looks like someone staring at the ceiling, someone sitting quietly by a window, someone taking too long to respond, someone hesitating in ways other people do not notice, but inside there may be 1,000 tabs open, and none of them fully closed. Overthinking also changes the way people see themselves. It is not only the world that gets analyzed. Eventually, the mind turns inward. It starts observing its own thoughts, its own words, its own reactions. Why did I say that? Why did I feel that way? Why am I like this? And soon the mind is not only thinking, it is thinking about thinking, watching itself, questioning itself, replaying not only conversations, but identity. And that creates another layer of complexity. Because when the observer becomes the thing being observed, the loop grows even deeper. This is why overthinking often feels like being divided in two. One part is trying to live. The other part is watching, analyzing, questioning, predicting. One part is in the moment. The other part is standing outside the moment, taking notes. And after enough time, even ordinary life can begin to feel heavy. A normal text, a small decision, a social interaction. A pause, a silence, a look. Everything starts to carry extra weight. And perhaps that is why overthinking can make simple things feel difficult. Not because the person is weak, not because they are broken, but because their mind is adding layers to everything. Layers of possibility, layers of memory, layers of prediction, layers of meaning. What appears simple on the outside no longer feels simple on the inside. There is also something paradoxical about overthinking. Many overthinkers are deeply aware people. They notice details others miss. They reflect deeply. They sense patterns. They pick up on shifts in mood, tone, and behavior. Sometimes this leads to real insight. Sometimes it reveals things other people overlook. But that same awareness can become a burden, because more awareness creates more information. More information creates more possibilities, and more possibilities create more questions. Eventually, the very thing that helps a person understand the world can also make the world feel infinitely more complicated. That is why overthinking is not simply too much thought. It is often too much openness to possibility. The mind does not settle easily. It keeps exploring. What else could this mean? What else could happen? What else am I missing? And perhaps that is what makes it so hard to stop. Because from the inside, stopping can feel irresponsible, like letting go too soon, like missing something important, like leaving a puzzle unfinished. The brain does not like unfinished puzzles. It returns to them again and again and again. That is true for conversations, for choices, for regrets, for memories, for relationships, sometimes even for things that happened years ago. The body moves on, life moves on, other people move on. But the overthinking mind may still revisit the same scene, searching for something that was never fully resolved. And maybe this is the deepest truth about overthinking. It is not always about fear. It is often about unfinished certainty. A mind trying to close loops in a world full of loose ends. A mind trying to understand what may never be fully understandable. A mind trying to protect itself with thought. Trying to predict pain before it arrives. Trying to decode life before life has even happened. And in that sense, overthinking is one of the most human things the mind can do. Because beneath all the repetition, beneath all the what-ifs, beneath all the analysis, there is something familiar, a desire to feel safe, a desire to make sense of uncertainty, a desire to know what comes next. But life rarely offers complete answers. People remain complicated. The future remains unclear. Silence does not always explain itself. And the human mind, remarkable as it is, cannot solve every uncertainty by thinking harder. Still, it keeps trying. That is what makes overthinking so fascinating and so exhausting. It is the mind chasing clarity inside a world that refuses to stay simple. It is the search for peace becoming the source of unrest. It is a strategy that once promised protection, slowly turning into a prison of endless thought. And yet, when you step back, there is something almost tragic and beautiful about it. A brain working overtime, a mind trying to connect every dot. A person wanting to understand life so completely that they end up carrying more of it than most people ever see. Maybe that is why overthinkers often seem quiet on the outside, because so much is happening on the inside. And maybe that is why overthinking feels so isolating. Not because the person is alone, but because other people rarely see the full weight of what their mind is carrying. The loops, the possibilities, the invisible rehearsals, the unfinished questions, the imagined outcomes, the hidden meanings. The effort is real, even when no one else can see it. So perhaps overthinking is not just a mental habit. It is a whole way of experiencing life, a way of moving through uncertainty, a way of trying to stay ahead of pain, regret, rejection, or loss. A way of searching for answers where there may only be ambiguity. And maybe that is the final contradiction. The mind overthinks because it wants peace, but the more it chases certainty, the further peace seems to move away. It searches for control, but ends up trapped in its own search. It wants clarity, but creates more noise. It wants to protect the person, but slowly becomes the thing that drains them. That is the psychology of people who overthink things. Not a simple weakness, not a simple flaw, but a complicated relationship between uncertainty, sensitivity, memory, imagination, and the endless human desire to understand. Thank you for watching Brain Code. If you enjoy exploring the hidden patterns behind human behavior, subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of the mind. See you in the next one.